You're listening to Around Comics. 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 You're listening to Around Comics.
From Chicago, this is Around Comics, the comic culture podcast where we talk about everything in and around the world of comics and comics culture. I'm your host, Mr. Christopher Niesman, and I'm joined as always by my partner in crime, Mr. Brian Salazar.
I am the human pompadour.
You are well coiffed.
All right, that's getting out of control.
The quarantine coif.
It's getting crazy.
It is.
I'm going crazy.
And get your Elvis on. Speaking of the microphone, son.
I'm trying. Yeah, I don't know why I'm not very loud. I don't know what's going on.
You're low. It is just myself and Mr. Salazar tonight. This fine quarantine evening. But we've got
Thursday evening
lined up to chit chat about. We're gonna start off. This is the first of the Comics 101.
Our Comics 101 challenge to Tom King, who has accepted the challenge. So he's in. He said he was all in. If we give him 3 new Comics 101 episodes, he will give us a Adam Strange.
It's a 3-for-1 deal.
I guess. Well, that's the deal you made. I don't know.
The Tom King 3-for-1.
That was the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
What are you drinking there? I know you've been healthy this week. You're not drinking.
This is actually it's lemonade kombucha.
Ugh. The fuck. You know, why is it you guys like you go hard for like 25 years and abuse yourself, and then you think in a week you're gonna fix it with shit like that? Kombucha. I
haven't had a drink in 11 days.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. It's it's probably like a lot of people out there. I came to the realization that I was probably doing a little bit too much bored drinking. It's like, I'm bored. Yeah, maybe I'll get a drink.
Yeah, so, I'm definitely doing my share of that. I'm definitely drinking more than I normally do, but
that, and it's when the fat pants were starting to be a little tight. I was like, okay, maybe it's time to maybe cut back on the drinking and the carb intake. So trying to be a little bit healthier here. So talking about superheroes, I want to try and look like one, not like you.
What does that mean?
Huh?
What is that supposed to mean?
Slim and your jujitsu and throwing people around.
I'm not as slim as I want.
I've put on killer now.
I've put on like 20 pounds in the last 6 months or so. Now, probably 12 to 15 of that is muscle, but I've definitely put on a few pounds over the last. I've been eating like shit and I still train really hard.
5 pounds of anger.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm much more gentler. I'm a much gentler, easygoing Sal now. I don't get angry really.
Mm-hmm. But no, it's I commend you on your workouts, and you are an inspiration, sir.
Oh geez,
you are a fucking inspiration. All right, so shall we? We are going to get some other comic talk and comic culture talk later, but you want to jump right into our Comics 101?
Absolutely, why not?
All this stuff is fresh in my brain right now, and the older you get, the quicker it leaves. So I need to talk about it now while it's fresh. We are talking about the Roy Thomas, Neal Adams run of X-Men, not the Uncanny X-Men, just X-Men. This is Volume 1 of the X-Men. It started in April 1969 was their run. I believe that was the first cover date. And I think it's important to kind of get a little bit of a grasp of the era. So I'm going to run down a few things that were going on in 1969 when these comics came out, just to kind of set the era and the time.
The era.
from a music standpoint, you'd be all over this. Led Zeppelin 1 came out that year.
Oh, sweet.
So if you ask your voice activated smart speaker to play music from 1969, like I did, I got Good Times Bad Times was the first song that came up.
Very nice.
Along
Very
with
nice.
that, Abbey Road, the last recorded Beatles record, came out that year.
Quitters.
Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." It was also some great Neil Diamond, some Sweet Caroline.
Really, Sweet Caroline was that old? I don't know why I don't think of that in the same era. Like I don't think of that song as being that old, but
Sinatra's "My Way," 1960.
Sinatra, okay.
Yeah. Woodstock happened in 1969.
Yeah.
Along with that, probably the biggest news story of the year, maybe the biggest news story of the century, was 1969, the Apollo 11 moon landing.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the Sharon Tate LaBianca murders. That was 1969.
We will get there.
Oh, sorry.
The Arpanet sent its first communication. The Arpanet was the precursor to the internet. The Montreal Expo baseball franchise was established in 1969. It was the height of the Vietnam War. The Stonewall Riot happened in 1969. It was also the debut of the Boeing 747 and the Pontiac Trans Am Firebird. Made its debut in 1969.
Sweet ride.
Yep, and as you already mentioned, members of the Charles Manson cult killed 5 people in the
family
Hollywood Hills, including a pregnant Sharon Tate.
It was a family, not a cult.
So that's kind of what's going on. That's kind of what's going on in the world and the United States when these comics came out. At the time, Marvel didn't have nearly as many titles on the stands as they do now. I think DC was probably publishing a few more, but Marvel was still a pretty tight-knit collection of books. The X-Men, unfortunately for Marvel at the time, the X-Men was, I believe, their least selling book, and we will touch back on that here in a minute. The issues that we're talking about, they are 12 issues in total. They start with X-Men number 55 and go through X-Men number 66. 11 of the 12 issues were plotted and scripted by Roy Thomas. 8 of them were drawn by Neal, 8 of them were drawn with Neal Adams, and 7 of them had Roy Thomas and Neal Adams together. So at its core, we're really talking about 7, maybe 8 books here.
How did you get away with this? How did you get away with
Chris, why are we talking about 8 to 11 books? What's so important about these 8 to 11 books?
Nothing. I don't know. I don't see. I'll be hard pressed to agree that these 8 issues deserve a vaunted Comics 101. I think it's just you trying to cheese out on this.
They are the hey, ain't nobody paying for a sponsorship here or whatever. I'm gonna be very, very forthcoming. These are some of my favorite comic books of all time. These are from a nostalgia standpoint, just in my development as a comic book reader. When I discovered these comics, I instantly gravitated to them and I devoured them. I loved this run from Thomas and Neal Adams, mostly because of Neal Adams. And I think you would agree that books from the late 60s, early 70s can be a little laborious to get through right now. It's certainly a different writing style. Or the way that comics were really kind of put together in general, but Neal Adams' art on this run is still something to look back on. And
for sure.
I mean, they're beautiful,
especially if you look at it compared to anything up until that point. I mean, this is a Neal Adams we didn't really know anything about at the time, and his work was so much different than the stuff that you had seen, especially in X-Men books.
There's a few different ways to read these now. They're in print in several different formats. I think there's a trade paperback out. I have on order. They have a gallery edition, which is the big oversized hardcover, which is you had just shown the history of the Marvel Universe. The prestige, not prestige. Is it prestige format? What's the gallery format?
I don't know what to call it. Let's see. I don't think they say anything. They just, it's big ass format.
It's a big ass format. So they have this run in that size with a hardcover. I researched this and have them collected in the X-Men Omnibus volume.
I think it's called a Treasury Edition.
Treasury Edition. That's it. That's the word I was looking for. So I pulled these out, and I've done a lot of my research from the X-Men Omnibus Volume 2. Rory, will you lay down?
Goddamn dogs.
Goddamn dogs. What's nice about this is, as Sal was just alluding to, you get to see the art that's leading up to this run, which is interesting on a couple different accounts. Number one, it's like Don Heck. I love Don Heck. Don Heck's great. But you go from Don Heck to Neal Adams, and that is a huge change in art from a real kind of a stiff.
Don Heck was a stiff. You hear it?
His art in comparison to Neal Adams looks really stiff. It's a cleaner lines, certainly that, but then you go to Neal Adams' more realistic style and just a lot of detail work. But before Don Heck, the two artists that preceded Neal Adams, are you aware of who jumped on before Don Heck?
Buscema? No, he was after.
No, he was after.
Yeah. Kirby? I don't know.
Steranko.
Oh, all right.
Steranko did 2 issues, and he was followed almost immediately, I'll have to check, by a guy named Barry Smith.
Oh, well.
Who was not using the middle name at that point.
The Windsor. He didn't have the Windsor.
Very different looking Barry Windsor Smith. But as we kind of started, well, actually, Steranko is where a lot of this starts. So Neal Adams, as we mentioned, was working at DC. He was finishing up his run on Deadman, which another great one. If you can find old Deadman comics or collections, it's another great Neal Adams collection. So he's working over at DC as a freelancer, and he is talking to Steranko, and this is all from Neal Adams' account on a lot of this. And Steranko suggested that he go do some work for Marvel and work in the Marvel method, which I'm assuming, since Steranko, unless Steranko hated Neal Adams, he must have liked working in the Marvel method. And most everyone out there knows what that is, but Sal, if you want to catch people up on what the Marvel method is.
Well, basically, it was a way to quickly. They thought it was a way to quickly produce books, where basically you would have Stan would kind of come up with, generally speaking, Stan would come up with a plot, a narrative for the story, a basic outline of what was going to happen in this issue. He would tell that to the artist. Usually, it would be Jack Kirby, but he kind of started it with Jack because Jack was good enough of a creative talent that he could just go, we're going to have the Fantastic Four fight a monster this issue, and then Jack would draw an entire issue, and then Stan would come back and fill in, the dialogue and try and give it a sort of cohesive story, and that turned into the Marvel method, which lasted quite a long time.
There were people that probably whenever we started around comics, there were still probably a few people working Marvel method.
Yeah, if not on a continuous basis, there were certainly people that did it from time to time, if nothing. I think, didn't Chris Burnham do a book?
He works the Marvel method. Yeah.
Some of this stuff. And
some of the people I've talked to that have worked Marvel method like it. It's different. It's just it's a different method to it, and it's it's plot, draw, script, and it takes a little bit. I always thought it sounded like the goofiest thing until we talked to John Byrne about it, and he just made it sound like the most natural thing in the world, because he did Marvel method with Claremont on the X-Men, a decade later.
Well, it's probably a little freeing to some degree for some artists, especially guys like Byrne and Kirby and those kind of artists, where they were storytellers anyway. So it was like, just give them the outline and they can kind of, they know in their head what they're trying to do, and then you kind of make it work at the end. And I mean, we got to remember too, these were not the most, character driven or the most intricate plotted of stories. These were churning out monthly issue after monthly issue of comics, mostly for kids.
And a lot of them were one issue stories. Yeah. It's like, this is what's going to happen here, and we get into that more with these comics as we kind of jump in. It's really a lot of 2-issue stories. It's set it up and then resolve it, move on to the next one. And so Neal Adams wants to come over and do some work for Marvel. The way that, once again, that Neal Adams recounts the story is that he meets with Stan Lee, and Stan obviously wants to have Neal Adams, who's one of the rising superstars in the industry, come and work at Marvel. And as the story goes, Neal Adams says, put me on your lowest selling book, and take that for however you want. I think you can look at it different ways. It's he was going to come in and show what an amazing draw he was, and what an amazing creator if he could take their lowest selling book and kind of pull it up to higher sales numbers. I also think it probably gave him a little bit of cover, right? If it didn't go great, well, it was a really poor selling book anyway.
Well, I mean, this has been a story. Roy Thomas has not necessarily agreed with this story. Let's just say that.
And we will, yes, this will be a common theme as we talk about a lot of this run, is that there's the Neal Adams account of how things happened, and then there is the Roy Thomas account about how things kind of transpired. And it's not that they have been at each other's throats about it. I think they both just kind of remember things differently. And like you were talking about, at the time, they're pounding out comics. This is the Bullpen Era, which is another interesting thing. Neal Adams comes to Marvel, and he's drawn X-Men comics in the bullpen. He's at the Marvel offices. He's not in his studio doing this. But yeah, I can totally see in the bullpen environment where things are moving a mile a minute, and they're cranking out pages, and you've got editors and writers and artists. It's like when they would ask Stan Lee about creating Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or whoever, he'd be like, I don't know exactly who came up with this or that. I know I did that, and so did. I can see that.
At the time, nobody was really thinking about legacy. They were just, we had deadlines, they had deadlines.
Yeah, they were trying to make magazines.
Yeah. So, who knows what the real story is. But Neal is another terrific self-promoter of comics.
Yes, and a storyteller.
Yes, and a storyteller. And, has some wild ideas sometimes of things. Let's just say that.
So, at the time, X-Men, once again, lowest selling book at Marvel. Right before Roy Thomas, who's at that point, I believe, the associate editor at Marvel. This is just prior to him taking over as EIC. I think he would become the EIC in 1971 ish. So this is just a couple years prior to that. But working on the book, it's Don Heck and Werner Roth on art, and Arnold Drake is the primary writer for a little while here. Interesting, just if if you're paying attention, apparently Arnold Drake was pretty good about writing about teams of misfits who are led by old men in wheelchairs. As Arnold Drake is also probably more well known as being the creator of the Doom Patrol. So here he is working on the X-Men. His last major creative contribution is that he created the character of Alex Summers, who is the brother of Scott Summers, who would eventually become the character Havoc, who is still around today, as far as I know. And we'll get more on Havoc here in a little bit. But yeah, Neal comes over. He gets paired up with Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas is thrilled about it, and so they take over on issue 56 as a team. Roy Thomas takes over on issue 55 with plotting and scripting duties. Moves the Arnold Drake story one issue further, and then Neal Adams joins on issue 56, which one of my favorite covers. It is the What is the Power, which is the first appearance of the Living Monolith. In the couple issues before that, he had been the Living Pharaoh. He gets supercharged with the mutant powers of Havoc. Actually, the story is he blocks Alex Summers off from receiving like cosmic rays, and so since Alex Summers isn't taking that power and siphoning it away, then he explodes in power and becomes the Living Monolith. Funny little story.
The Living Monolith.
The Living Monolith. But one of my favorite stories about this first issue is the actual the cover. The cover that was printed. It's iconic. It's one of my favorites. But there was a preliminary cover, a first cover that Neal had designed, and it had the X-Men pinned to the X-Men logo, and the Living Monolith grasping the logo, and then the tubed up Alex Summers. It's super cool cover. Roy Thomas in his introduction in the omnibus says this was the biggest mistake that Marvel had made in the year of 1969, was not running with Neal's original cover. The reason why is, even though Stan Lee was the editor-in-chief at Marvel, he was not the guy who had the last call on everything. That distinction belonged to his father-in-law, who was Martin Goodman, who was the publisher
of son of a bitch
Marvel Comics. And actually, without Martin Goodman, there probably isn't a Marvel. He founded Timely Comics, which will become Marvel Comics. He was the publisher, and his son-in-law Stan Lee would become the editor-in-chief. But Martin Goodman saw the cover and said, no, we're not going to put out a cover where you can't see the logo. And so he nixed that, and Neal Adams had to go back and redraw that cover. So right from the start, Neal Adams is getting the pinch from the man, and that would be a little bit of a theme. As we move into the interiors on 56, and we're not going to go through the stories of the interiors on every issue, but I think it's important to kind of start things off just seeing some of Neal Adams' work here. I mean, God, the way that he drew Angel to begin with was absolutely amazing.
The costume was a little weird.
The costume's a little weird. They were doing weird stuff in the 60s. I always loved his Beast. It was actually Neal Adams' depiction of Beast made me love that version of the character more than the Blue Furred version of Beast. And it's because of, we'll see one of my favorite pages a little bit later, but that was just like, that character is awesome. That is maybe it's because I was a short furry wrestler guy whenever I was, reading this, and felt some affinity to that character. But I became a huge Beast fan because of this run. So Neal Adams takes this over. One of the things that comic book companies at the time were not doing was opening up the full arsenal of coloring to comics. They helped control cost by limiting the amount of screens that you were able to use in production. They only use those for covers. So you may notice that in older comic books, the covers may have really nice continuous tone with nice gradients and that kind of stuff. But you get into the interiors and they're really flat. And I think I've got a Superman comic page in there that just kind of shows the flatness of comics of that era. And that's because they didn't have the full range of screens to use to mix colors in the 4-color printing process. Neal Adams comes onto the book and he's like, if I'm going to do this book, you're going to give us the ability to really color it how it should be colored. And if you look at Neal Adams' art, he has a very sculpted, realistic style to his art, and to have really flat colors in it really doesn't serve the art nearly as well. So he comes on board and kind of strong arms his way, and he's a superstar. So I can imagine how that was probably a pretty brief conversation. He says, no, we're going to color this way, and it's beautiful. It's one of the reasons I actually prefer reading Neal Adams comics on newsprint instead of a lot of the reprints where it's a glossy stock that kind of flattens the color out.
Was he a superstar at that time in 1969?
He was we'll say rising star. He was certainly a name. He had done the Spectre and his Dead Man run, so he was established. He was absolutely a guy. So it's he wasn't Steranko at that point, I don't think, but no man was. I mean, Steranko was his own thing, but he was coming along. It was a name. The story, once again, from Neal Adams, when he came on board, they said that they were going to cancel the X-Men in 2 issues, and so he says, we squeezed out 10. So I think he was a draw. Speaking of and that's my favorite page, is that Beast falls out the window page. Speaking of the art, Neal Adams is great, but Tom Palmer is freaking amazing with Neal Adams. A lot of people talk about Palmer with Tomb of Dracula, Gene Colan, and his work on Tomb of Dracula. But when he would ink Neal Adams, I think equally that magic of the almost the third person in the room from a penciler inker relationship, and have some Tom Palmer examples here. And just I don't know if I've ever liked anyone else inking Neal Adams. I know Giordano inked Neal Adams a lot at DC and did an amazing job, but Tom and Neal was awesome.
I have no comment, but
so anyway, so they wrap up the Living Monolith story arc, and we start to see a trend with the we say arcs. These are 2-issue stories. It's set up in the first issue and then resolution in the second, but there's still kind of some overlapping threads in between stories, so you'll see kind of the end of different storylines will kind of be drawn out, and so you kind of, I think, start to see the seeds of some stuff of the modern storytelling as it would come about in the 70s, where it's less one shots and a little bit more soap opera is starting to develop. And at the time of X-Men being published here, they were still supposed to be teenagers, but you're seeing more adult relationships.
I did. That was one of the
and
things.
Neal Adams does not draw them as teenagers.
No, as I went back and I was kind of skimming over these issues, it was funny because on like half of the covers, it's the strangest teens, in the universe or whatever the hell it said.
Yeah.
But it's like, these are not teenagers. These are.
No, and we're coming to the end of the original 5 X-Men, and they're not teenagers anymore, but they're still kind of sticking along that party line. Before Roy Thomas and Neal Adams come onto this book, the X-Men, as you would read it, they were kind of looked at like any other supergroup. They would police officers and common people on the street would talk about them and look at them like they would the Avengers. They were a crime fighting super group. And then Roy Thomas comes in with Neal Adams, and you start to see a little bit more of the development of Beware the Mutant, which I think there have been some threads about that before, but it kind of tailed off. Well, they bring it back full force. They reintroduce the Sentinels, which hadn't been in the X-Men comics since like issue 18 when Kirby was still on it. So the Sentinels come back, and we start to see a little bit more of the modern storyline with the X-Men, that mutants are a threat to humanity and they need to be controlled. And so you start to see more of the politics of it, and not just the cartoonish villain to punch. It's actually society is starting to become a little bit more the villain. And as we kind of said at the top of the show, it's 1969. There's a lot of social unrest in the world, so it's a little bit more relevant at the time that that society be complicated. So we're starting to get into some more adult themes in the comics, which I don't think that we had seen in the X-Men up until that point.
I think one of the other things that they established was sort of the link between nuclear radiation and mutant powers and mutants, which I don't think was really something dealt with that much. But there's that one storyline of this with the Sentinels, and sort of the ending of it is they decide that the sun is the greatest threat to
the sun
humanity.
is the source of all mutation.
Yeah. But if you think about it, like, that was really where that idea of like, this is a mutation, this is caused by radiation, this is caused by the atomic radiation that we're experiencing, and that stuff gets dealt with by Claremont and Byrne later on, and even years and years after that.
Sure. And the funny Claremont footnote here is that there's, once again, in the bullpen, a lot of bouncing around and bouncing off of ideas, and so you don't really know who came up with everything all the time. Well, there was a young intern at the Marvel bullpen at that time, named Chris Claremont, who was interning on the X-Men, and he says that was his idea, was to trick the Sentinels into launching themselves into the sun. So
wow, look at that. Maybe. Who knows?
Young whippersnapper Chris Claremont, telling Roy Thomas and Neal Adams how it's done. So we've got the 2-issue Sentinel storyline. So we go into issue 58, which is when Alex Summers takes on the identity of Havoc, which Roy Thomas says he came up with the name, and nobody disputes him. So Roy Thomas named Havoc. Arnold Drake created Alex Summers, and Neal Adams designed the costume. And the Havoc costume is, I mean, it's not just even for the time, but just in general, the Havoc look is so freaking cool. And in the
hold on a second.
I love that costume.
Wait.
It is so dope.
The helmet thing is stupid.
Yeah.
But the manifestation of his powers is
Yes.
what's cool. It's not even the costume, because the costume is just like black with a
And that's
dumb
what's cool about
helmet.
it is that all his costume is a spotted black. There's no definition, no nothing. In those comics, it is just spotted black, and it works. It is so fucking cool looking.
But the helmet's stupid. I'm
You
sorry.
think the helmet's stupid?
The dumb, like, who would wear the 3-piece thing with the, like, what is that? Like, why would you wear that? That makes no sense.
Focus is power, man.
Okay, if you say so. I don't know if I agree with that one, but
I love the Havoc costume.
I love the manifestation of his powers and the way that it changes. I think that's awesome. I've always thought that the helmet thingy was
Let's
dumb.
agree that it's a costume that works in comics, but would never work in like a live action adaptation.
I don't know. Yeah, it's
Because it would just be like a black jumpsuit.
It's like, why
And
are you wearing this silly, you know?
Yes. So, but I love the Havoc costume. It's one of my favorites. This is, I think, the sweet spot of the run. I think the 2-issue Sentinels storyline is where everything is clicking. I think that Roy Thomas and Adams and Palmer are like this great focused team. It's my favorite story out of the run, and I think it's not that it peaks, but I think this is where everything as a team is really clicking. So 57, 58 are probably my favorite issues out of this. Which goes, is it 59? It's actually 3 issues. It's 57, 58, 59. Which 59 is probably my favorite cover. That's one where it's the last X-Man with Cyclops.
Mm-hmm.
So we move on to issue 60. It's the introduction of the character Sauron, and just some interesting side notes on that. Roy Thomas and Adams are talking about the kind of stories that they want to write and the kind of villains they want to come up with, and they both wanted to do a mutant vampire, and they wanted to do like a mutant human bat hybrid, and this is a precursor to Man Bat, right? So Man Bat hasn't been created yet, and so it's kind of the idea. They're working on a Man Bat type idea. They're not for sure if they actually pitched that and tried to run it through the Comics Code Authority, or if they decided without even doing it that there's no way that the Comics Code Authority would allow that, because there was a strict no vampires rule in comics. Seriously, the Comics Code Authority, we've talked about it in the past. I mean, they're pretty draconian about stuff, and would have stuff changed all the time. And there were just some subjects you could not bring up. There were some things that you just absolutely could not have in a comic. You look at guys like Steranko, who really kind of skirted around it and kind of had fun with it through a lot of innuendo and sight gags. But anyway, it was decided that they couldn't do a bat mutant vampire, and so they decided to make it a dinosaur, and that's why Sauron is a big flying lizard. But still,
sure, that makes sense.
But still a psychic vampire.
Sure, is basically.
but
I
he's
mean,
a
what is a
psychic
vampire?
vampire.
Like what? Yeah, have you? Sorry, but
It,
psychic
I don't know, ask the
vampire.
69 Comics Code.
It makes me laugh. Do you watch what we do in the shadows, the FX show?
I have not. Is it?
It
Is it good?
It is one of my favorite things on television. It is like appointment television for me. I cannot.
Oh, by the way, I told Marta that you were into The Crown, and she's like, "That's a goddamn lie. He's not into The Crown."
It's hilarious. It's really funny, but
It's a movie, and then it became a series, right?
Yeah, it's a movie. What's his name? Taiki Waititi, whatever the hell. The guy that did Thor Ragnarok, the movie. Anyway, he did that movie like before he did Thor and all that, and the movie's pretty good, but the show's really, really funny. And but there's one of the characters on it is an emotional vampire. So, and it's pretty funny how they put him into the show. It's so that when you say he's a psychic vampire, that's what I think of.
Nice. So we go through the Sauron storyline, issue 60 and 61. Issue 62, Sauron is still a pain in the ass, but they end up in the Savage Land. And 62, while not my favorite cover in the series, it is absolutely how I picture Khazar anytime I think of that character. It's got to be one of the best depictions of Khazar that's ever been on a cover.
Except like the hair is like, he's supposed to be this basically Tarzan living, in the wild land, the savage land, but he's got sort of he's kind of got my hair perfectly coiffed.
He's well coiffed and clean shaven.
Yes. But
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I under suspension of disbelief. Yeah. So here's the funny thing about this run and comics in general at the time. Khazar was a bigger draw than the X-Men. This is the highest selling issue out of the run because Khazar is on the cover.
Of course, Khazar was huge in the 60s. I mean, he was basically a 60s icon.
If you wanted to draw to your comic book, you put Khazar in there. All right. Welcome to 1969 Marvel Comics, my friends.
Taste change, man. He was a half-naked dude. It was like
you said, he was Tarzan.
Hippies. Yeah, he was Tarzan.
He was Tarzan. His best friend is a saber-toothed tiger.
When did the Jungle Book come out? Maybe it was kind of a Jungle Book, Mowgli.
Could have been. One of the kind of fun, sneaky things that Thomas and Adams do in this is that they introduce this silver-haired, mysterious stranger in this issue. And it's not revealed until the last panel with the great line as he reaches towards this helmet and they're commenting that Angel didn't recognize him and he reaches for his helmet, which is Magneto's helmet, and he says, perhaps clothes do make the man. And so it's been Magneto the entire time, Sal.
Oh my God.
The entire time.
No.
Yes. But I thought that was, when I was reading it, I knew it was Magneto, but I figure at the time, if you were a kid, and it's like, oh my God, it's Magneto. And speaking of kind of the evolution of the writing style, and if not writing style, the writing themes, this is the first time that I'm pretty sure that Magneto was more than a cartoonish, criminal mastermind, bang pow villain. This is the first time that I think they were starting to actually give some depth to that character and a little bit of dimension. He wasn't just the cookie cutter, bwahaha,
right,
cartoonish villain. So that's one thing with this series and why I still go back to it and love it. Once again, the writing may not be totally modern. It may be a little bit of a slog, but in the themes, they're starting to become more modern and more sophisticated. I don't feel like these comics are written for a 10-year-old. They're really written for a little bit older audience.
Yeah.
I think starting to see that now, and I think even in Marvel and Stan Lee would talk about this as they kind of figured out in the late 60s, early 70s that their market was going away from 10 and 12-year-olds, and it was going more towards college age, and you would see that with as Mad Magazine would continue to have more popularity, but also Doctor Strange, the Hulk, those were looked at as counterculture figures and were pretty popular on college campuses. So with the X-Men, we start to see a few more of, if not adult, more adult themed storylines and character development. So as we move on through the Magneto stuff, that is I believe the very last issue that Thomas and Adams would work on together. So that's the last Thomas Adams issue. Issue 64, which is not going to be in a lot of the collections. If you're buying the Neal Adams X-Men collections, they're not going to have issue 55, they're not going to have issue 64, and they're not going to have issue 66 because Neal Adams wasn't on those. With issue 64, of note, it is the first appearance of Sunfire, which is kind of neat. It's a character that Roy Thomas had been wanting to introduce, and that's really starting to show international mutants, and that mutants are happening around the world.
I always loved Sunfire. I always loved that character.
He's awesome.
Yeah,
it's a cool costume design.
Yeah.
I always loved that he was really an asshole.
Yes, yeah, he was.
He was always, it's like, and they'd be like, was he ever officially a member? Like before, before the 2000s? I'm sure he's.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I want to say.
Was he? Because he was always like, I don't want to be in your stupid group.
I thought he was in the 80s, but I don't know. Honestly, I can't remember.
Around every once in a while, but
wasn't he in X-Force or something like that, or
probably
one of those X teams?
Like but so this is the very first Sunfire issue. It's Don Heck is back, but it's Tom Palmer on inks, and I think Tom Palmer is trying to do his best to embellish Don Heck in a way that kind of resembles Neal Adams. You see some of the with Neal Adams, it's a lot in the lips, in like expressions, and you can actually, his people look like they are saying things. You can almost enunciate with
right
that, and that's just kind of a Neal Adams staple is they actually look like they're saying something. So anyway, so Neal Adams off this one. I think he probably needed a break because he was doing other stuff. I think I don't know, he may have been drawing another comic at the time, and he had advertising illustration stuff going on. So Roy Thomas said that he was kind of up against deadlines all the time. So prior to this issue, he had gone to Roy Thomas and said, hey, I've got an idea. I want to plot and draw an issue. And then if you can come in and clean up the scripting, that would be great. And I think Roy Thomas said his reaction was, yeah, as long as we're both getting paid the same, I don't care. And so Neal Adams plots issue 65, draws it, and in kind of what started in the first issue where there was some editorial decisions that were made probably without Neal's input, now it comes back around. Issue 65, two things happen that may or may not have led to Neal leaving the book and leaving Marvel for a while. Number one, Roy Thomas is associate editor. He's writing the Avengers and doing other stuff at Marvel. The production manager at Marvel basically went to Neal and said, Neal, I'm pulling you off this because I need you to finish up this. And so so Roy Thomas, without talking to Adams, goes to this new guy that was coming over to do some work at Marvel named Denny O'Neil, and says, hey, Denny, why don't you finish up scripting this issue of the X-Men? And so he drops Denny O'Neil to do the scripting on it without telling Neal Adams. And I think that probably rankled Adams that he wasn't consulted about it. And even though Thomas says that Denny O'Neil would do just as good a job as he would. The funny thing about that is that only precedes a couple years before Neal Adams and Denny O'Neil would start a historic run on Green Lantern, Green Arrow, which ran for, I forget how many issues, but they would become a super team all on their own, which maybe that's another Comics 101. I'll pick a good 7 or 8 issues of that to research.
You son of a bitch.
So the other thing, and it's really pretty apparent whenever you look at the art, is Stan Lee didn't like monsters that weren't humanoid. This is a thing that goes back to early days at Marvel. And so he always wanted any monsters to be humanoids. And he sees Neal Adams' reptilian monster in this, nixes it, and tells Marie Severin to redraw the panels.
Oh my God.
Which Marie Severin does, because she's Marie Severin. She's a pro, and it's like, okay. And you can see in the panels in this which ones are not Neal Adams and which ones are Marie Severin. So I'm sure that had something to do with Neal being like, okay, it's I'm done.
I'm done.
I'm out of here. So 66 rolls around. Neal Adams is gone. Roy Thomas is back to plot and script the last issue. Sal Buscema jumps on, and in one last ditch effort to save the series from cancellation, they bring over the uber popular Incredible Hulk to draw some viewership over from his very popular title at the time. And that works to no avail, because Martin Goodman pulls the plug after issue 66 and cancels the series, and the X-Men fade away forever.
We never hear from them again.
And ever. Oh, but wait, a couple months later, Martin Goodman sees the sales figures from the X-Men from the Thomas Adams run and says, hey, maybe this series has a little juice left in it after all. And he decides to put the series in reprint form from issue 67 going forward. And we know from looking back in history that would last until issue 93. That was the last reprinted issue. And Roy Thomas, as one of his very last acts as editor-in-chief at Marvel, was to make the suggestion that they relaunch the X-Men with an all-new team of international superhero mutants. And the rest,
from places like Canada.
And the rest is history. So
the rest is history. Has it been better or worse since then? I don't know with the X-Men. Is it?
I love that. I love that Neal Adams run, just from the art standpoint. And like I said, that's something. The 3-issue Sentinel story is still something I'll go back and page through, at least once or twice a year. I came into the X-Men reading, probably Paul Smith was probably the first X-Men issues I was reading, probably like 175-ish or so. Then I went back and discovered the Byrne Claremont run. Absolutely fell in love with that. That changed me as a comics fan forever. Before I developed a big appreciation for the Dave Cockrum stuff, which at the time for me I thought looked pretty cartoony compared to John Byrne. I went back, and it was Marvel. They released them as, it was like Marvel Classics. Do you remember that?
I do. There was X-Men Classics.
It was not X-Men Classics. It was
I remember the X-Men classics with the Arthur Adams covers.
No, different series.
Okay.
This was before those. Yes, the X-Men classics, and those, I think those. What did those start with? Did that start with Giant Size and go forward? Maybe.
It was like the 120s, 130s.
Okay, maybe the Burn. Maybe it started with Burn. I forget. But prior to that, there was a 3-issue X-Men Classics series that was released, and it was oversized issues, and it was collecting the Neal Adams, Roy Thomas issues, and so that's where I read those.
According to Wikipedia, Classic X-Men,
not X-Men Classics,
Classic X-Men. Those were Arthur Adams covers, though.
Mike Zach.
I'm looking at it right now.
You're thinking of the X-Men Classics.
No, I'm not. Classic X-Men.
Oh, maybe it's X-Men Classics.
I think you're thinking.
We're arguing.
It was originally. Well, here, no. You know what it is? Classic X-Men, originally titled X-Men Classics, and later retitled X-Men Classic.
Yes.
Is a reprint comic book series published by Marvel Comics. The first volume was a limited series which collected stories from the Roy Thomas, Neal Adams, Tom Palmer run on X-Men. Because that's where I found them. That was where I found those issues.
And those covers, those are Mike Zach covers, dude.
See, I saw the Art Adams covers. Is the ones I remember.
Those, yes. That's whenever they relaunched that series, X-Men Classics.
But
Classic X-Men, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
The series reprinted X-Men 57 through 63, 59 and 61 to be split across 2 issues with new gatefold covers, opening pages which serve to summarize the events of previous issues, and a foreword by John Byrne. The new material reunited original writer Roy Thomas and original inker Tom Palmer, but penciler Neal Adams was replaced by Mike Zach. The series also included new covers and frontispieces? I don't know what the hell that word is. Produced by artists such as Art Adams. Issues 1 through 16, 8 through 23. Yeah, Zach didn't do the covers. Zach did the
covers of the Roy Thomas.
He didn't.
Adams once.
18 through 23. Steve Lytle did 30 to 42.
That's a Mike Zach cover.
What is that from?
That's the X-Men Classics.
I don't know. I'm just reading it off of
Yep.
I don't think that's a cover though.
Yep.
I think that's an interior page.
I had them. I had those comics.
All right. Whatever.
Yep. I think they're 2 different series. I think there's X-Men Classics and then Classic X-Men.
Maybe there was. X-Men Classics. Let's see. What is X-Men Classics? Yeah, these are Art Adams covers. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I love the Art Adams covers. I know what you're talking about.
X-Men Classics, 1986. Yeah, who knows? Whatever. Okay. Well, we had a bunch of different reprinted stuff, so.
Yeah.
But that's also where I found those issues, and the Sauron stuff for whatever reason, and that I remember that stuff vividly. Like I can remember reading those issues and going, "Wow, this is interesting." This is a different kind of X-Men, because I don't know when I started reading X-Men. I have no idea. I mean, I can't remember. It's gonna be like
Byrne, Paul Smith, or
yeah, it's so hard. It's all conflated at this point because I've read it all, so it's hard to remember what I read when and in what order. But I definitely remember reading those reprints, and that's when I.
This Neal Adams guy is pretty good.
He's not bad. Well, that was the weird thing. Is like I knew who Neal Adams was, obviously, but I don't even know if I knew he had done X-Men before then. You know what I mean? It was 1969. I wasn't even born. So I don't know that I knew he had done the X-Men at all. So that was kind of an interesting.
So, and out of all of it, he did 8 issues.
8 fucking issues, and you give him a goddamn Comics 101 for 8.
I think it's
issues.
one of the most important runs in the history of the book.
Really? No.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah,
think so.
I think it.
I don't know.
I don't know if the series gets resurrected without
Top 10.
I don't think I think the series may have died and never come back without it. So
well, that's hard to say. You don't know. You don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, it's maybe it doesn't come back when it comes back. Maybe it does. Maybe it's not Byrne and Paul Smith and Claremont who bring it back, but
Dave Cockrum.
Don't forget Dave Cockrum
for a long time.
But yeah, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would consider it one of the most important runs from the standpoint of the quality of the stories. I don't know that anyone goes back to those stories and goes, "Oh, that was, those are my favorite X-Men stories. Those are the ones that define the X-Men for me." I think there's a lot of stories before that.
I think
most people would
there's
say
stories out of those. We'll call it 10 issues. We'll call it 10. It's 12 issues, but we'll call it 10.
Stretch it. That's fine.
I think it reinvented the Sentinels in a way that was used, going forward until probably Grant Morrison. I mean, those were Sentinels at that point. He updated the look, and I think that Byrne and Claremont ran with his version of the Sentinels, and I think that was important. Once again, the development of Magneto as kind of a multi-layered, 3-dimensional character.
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you from the standpoint of it's important in what came after it. What I'm saying is I don't know if I would qualify it as one of the most important runs from the perspective of the actual stories.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, sure.
But I understand what you're saying.
That absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Because they're bite-sized stories. But you also have to understand, though, like X-Men ends at like number 200 for me.
Well, yeah, I get that. But
it's like Trial of Magneto, over, done, period. They didn't need to go on anymore.
Okay, all right. Well, I don't know if that's... all I'm saying is like, there's no way I'm putting putting this ahead of, Days of Future Past or Dark Phoenix.
Days of Future.
Or
Days of Future Past, 2-issue story.
I understand that.
That's amazing. I should do a Comics 101 on that.
But might as well. I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do, Days of Future Past. That's what I'm going to do, Comics 101. No, but all I'm saying is the events in those books much more important in the overall history of the X-Men than whatever happened in these 10, 8, 9 issues of Neal and Roy.
Yeah. And I think that we both agree that it stands on the art more than anything. So
I'm not but I have to, well, okay, 2 things. Like I said, when you told me you were going to do this, I went back and I didn't read all the issues, but I sort of went through them and looked at them again and went, oh, it kind of remembered what they were. And 2 things struck me. One, I kind of forgot how good Neal Adams was. You know what I mean? Like, obviously I know how good Neal Adams was, but it was like, oh, wow. Like you said, that seeing that Beast page again, or that Beast, that I remember it like it was yesterday. It's like, oh yeah, this is amazing. But then I also kind of, at this point in my life, I'm like, yeah, I'm not really that big of a Neal Adams fan. Because, and only because I think his art it gives a sort of dour feel to the comics. And I don't really like that in comics. I like, it's like it's realistic. And
you look at comics as escapism, and
well, especially
yeah,
the X-Men, or
he was ultra realism.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Windorf about it this week, and he said almost exactly the same thing, is that he got to a point that he had seen so much Neal Adams that that he would rather see someone
I'd rather see Darwin Cook than Neal Adams. You know what I mean?
What was that?
I'd rather see Darwin Cook.
And that's exactly what I told Windorf. Is like now I would rather read a Darwin Cook book than a Neal Adams book. And that's I think hilarious that you say that.
The reason is because I want comics to be comics, in the sense of I want them to be their own medium, and I think guys like Neal were trying to make comics more like film.
Yes.
And I don't want a comic book to be a cheap movie. I want it to be a great comic, and in a great comic, anything can happen.
Yeah.
So I think you had
a case of a great illustrator who was trying to elevate comics out of the lowbrow.
Don't get me wrong. Neal Adams is an amazing comic book artist, unbelievably talented and groundbreaking and legendary and all those things. I'm not suggesting anything about him isn't great. I'm just saying my personal taste is I don't really care for his art anymore like I once did.
Yeah.
That's all.
Completely fair. And looking at my own trek through comics, and when I became a big Neal Adams fan, that was after falling in love with John Byrne. And so to go from John Byrne to Neal Adams is a pretty easy leap, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I think Byrne brings a much lighter tone than Adams.
But it was going backwards to then kind of see, because I'm sure.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it was influence. It's not like going from John Byrne to even like Kirby or Eisner or something.
No, I see what you're saying.
It would be easier to like Kniff or something like that, which would be a more realistic type cartoonist.
Sure.
But it wouldn't be until years later that I would really appreciate folks like Romita Jr. and then Darwin Cook and a lot of artists that really kind of embrace that, Bruce Timm, that type of artist,
or guys like Jim Rugg, who we are going to be talking to, I think, soon, right?
But Rugg's like Stuart Eminem in that he can be such a chameleon. He can be a chameleon. I mean, if you ask Rugg to draw like,
oh no, he chooses to draw in a simplistic.
He'll do it. If he can do Darwin Cook, I mean, the guy can do whatever he wants.
But I mean, the majority of his work is much more cartoony and fun and not realistic. I'm not saying he can't do it, because that's an interesting thing. I want to talk to him. Actually, it brings up sort of a question about that, like why, but we'll get to that Sunday, right? I think we're talking to him Sunday.
Which speaking of, if you have any questions for Jim Rugg, you can submit them two different ways. We will be live streaming on Sunday night at 8:00 Central Standard Time. Sunday. Or you can ask them right there in the YouTube stream, or you can email us at
info@aroundcomics.com.
There you go.
There you have it.
Conversation with Mr. Rugg.
Mr. Jim Rugg. Jim Rugg.
What was that?
It was just some applause. Applause for our announcement, our guest,
Yes. Limited applause. Yeah, and hopefully we'll have Tom Caters along as well.
I believe we will
find him.
Yeah,
he's where in the world is Tom Caters?
He's being held hostage by his children, I believe.
I believe so.
I think that's the case. Yeah.
So you want to go? That's that's my 101.
Comics
Do you have any
101.
comments about that?
What do we call this? Well, no, I think it was very good. I think it was, it gave a nice rounded view of those issues and that sort of happening. And I like it because it does give you a sense of like, this is almost a lost moment in the X-Men history. I mean, there's been so many issues, hundreds and hundreds of X-Men issues since then, and movies and cartoons and everything else. And I think, people have a certain, depending on how old they are, what era they grew up in. Like my niece and nephew, the X-Men to her is the cartoon, the 90s Gambit and Rogue,
1990s X-Men animated series.
That's their X-Men.
Oh, don't go back and watch that, man. It's rough.
No, don't worry, I won't. But I think people have their sense of what the X-Men is, and it's like, well, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of things, and this especially is a little tiny part of it that
nugget.
Yeah, you could overlook very easily, but I think deserves a little further, inspection as we did give it.
Yeah.
So,
and it's been, thankfully, it's one of those that has been collected and reprinted ad nauseum. I mean, because it does have the Neal Adams name on it. Not to slight Roy Thomas, but it's been collected because it's Neal Adams.
How dare you, sir? How dare you slight Roy Thomas in that way?
I mean, the tell is that they leave all of the non-Neal Adams issues out of the collections. Poor Don Heck doesn't even get his Sunfire issue in. So but yeah, it's out there in a variety of different formats. Like I said, they've got the Treasury edition, which I think is like $30 on the old Amazon, and that's for the oversized hardcover Treasury edition. So I've got that one coming, which will be nice to see. Neal Adams art at that 13x9 or whatever the dimension is.
I just one of the things I want to talk about Jim Rugg is I want to yell at him for making me spend money on his podcast. They do such a great job of taking a look at expensive. It's never like cheap stuff you can go and get in a dollar bin. It's always like absolute editions and stuff like that. It's
never the 100-page giant for $4.99.
Yeah, but they just did a episode on the is it Absolute Edition or Omnibus, whatever, of Batman Year One. So I ordered that because and this is what they do so well on that
because
podcast.
Of Mazzucchelli,
well, not only that,
you have to see Mazzucchelli's art this big.
Not only that, but there's a bunch of like working stuff in it. There's a bunch of sketches and a bunch of layout stuff, and so it's like, okay,
you can't understand the mind of the master without looking at this.
Exactly. So I gotta yell at them. There's been a few things that they've delved into, and it's just like, and they're so passionate about it. It's just like, okay, I gotta get this, or else I'm not a comic book fan. I can't, I can't call myself a comic book fan if I don't order it. So yeah.
If you don't own this.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't do that to me. I speaking of absolutes and like the artist editions, and I'll just talk about this real quickly because I know I'm yammering on and on. I love the artist editions. I love the absolutes and all of that. So IDW has a little flash sale like a month and a half ago. And I go on there and I see that they've got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Artisan edition for like $40. And I'm just like, I would love to see. That's another one right there with the Neal Adams X-Men, that for a nostalgia piece, like the first 5-10 issues of TMNT in the 80s. I mean, you were right there the entire time.
Yeah. I could pull
really, really important books.
Yeah.
And I have such an affinity for those early Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics. And so I order this thing up. Where are you going?
Hold on.
Ah, the joys of the video feed. I can see whenever he's walking away and not listening to me. So, all right, I'm gonna grab my. Oh yeah, oh, okay. Oh my God, they were that handy. Okay, it only took him, 15
Yes,
seconds.
they're literally. Well, I only have a
original
couple
issues?
of them. That's issue number 4. That's an original.
Wow.
Yeah, that's an original issue, and I think I have another one in here. I got some Eries.
Oh, nice.
Maybe that's the only one I have here.
So
Yeah,
anyway,
I don't take very good care of my comics. I just, original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 4. It's laying in a bookcase.
Yes, there you go. Nice.
An oversized plastic
I
sleeve.
still have Fugitoid laying around.
Fugitoid. Nice.
Original. It's in shitty condition, but I still have it. So, whenever you order an artist edition, you expect it to come in the big box because they're big books, because they're full size,
right.
full page. So here's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Artisan edition.
Not so big.
And
it's like the same size.
Well,
they did the oversized.
So this is the funny thing. So I'm initially a little upset, and I'm just like, what? They sent this undersized Artisan edition, and Artisan edition is supposed to be the size of the original art. So I get into it, and once again, I'm a little disappointed, right? But as you get into it, there's a great foreword, and you find out that they were working on a material called Duo Shade.
Duo Shade. That was
the stock that they were making the comics out of. And so what it is, it's kind of a thick board, and it has material that you have to brush it with a chemical, and when you do that, it reveals lines, and if you go over it with a second chemical, it reveals lines that go in the other direction. And so if you look at the original productions, what looks like Zipatone is actually the Duo Shade artboards. And so that they fell in love with that stuff, and they knew that that's how they wanted the comics to look. That's why it has that really cool 3-dimensional kind of sculpted feel to the art.
It definitely had its own look. It gave it its own look for sure.
And that's because this chemically activated board that they were using. Here's the thing though. These guys are living on, pizza crust and Diet Dr. Pepper at the time, and have no money. So the boards for this stuff are $20 a piece, and this is back in 1983, 1984. And so the reason that this Artisan edition is undersized is because they cut all of the boards in half to stretch them, and so
drawn with a fucking microscope.
And so that why the TMNT, the size of those comics was different than any other comics. Those are the size of the artboards that they use. Those are half size of the Duo Shade boards.
Okay.
And so it goes into that whole story.
You should have done a TMNT Comics 101. That'd be a good one, actually.
That would be an awesome one.
That would be a good one.
But what you have in this are all of the layered. Which one? I'm trying to think which one. Was it Kevin Eastman that inked?
I don't remember.
I think it's the layered breakdowns and layouts. So you've got all of those, which are, you can follow the story, but they're all just layouts. And then something you'll never see, you've got the Kevin Eastman photocopies of the inked pages before they did the duo shading on them.
Oh,
and
neat.
so you see clean inked TMNT pages, which you never see, right? Because they were duo shaded.
Sure.
And so this is a much cleaner one. And then you see scans of the duo shaded original art, because they were smart, and I believe that they kept all the original art.
Was the duo shade a separate layer?
No, it was
they inked on it, and then
inked on the duo shade board, and then you would use a brush with one chemical to reveal
terrify me
lines that went in one direction. If you wanted to have a second layer of shading, then you would use a second chemical, and it would deepen the shading by revealing lines that went in the other direction.
Now you could just do it like with a click of a button.
Oh, for sure. And it's not going to cost you $20 a page.
No.
So it was an educational, if you're a process junkie, really interesting book to have, and kind of look from layout to ink to the duo shading and just kind of the history of the book. So it's the entire first issue done 3 different ways: layouts, then the inked Xeroxes of the inked pages, and then the finished duo shaded and lettered pages. That's pretty cool. I might have to pick that up. It is. It's a neat. If you're a Turtles fan, it's definitely worth having on the shelf. How could you not be? How could you not be a Turtles fan? Yeah. Now I want to know about other issues. But it was the emotional arc of anticipation, because it is media mail, so it took forever to get here. And then I got it, and I was really, really disappointed. And then I got into it, and I'm like, no, this is actually a really fucking cool book. Now I don't know. I don't remember. This might be a reprint, actually. I don't know if the green was an original or a reprint. I can't remember. Let's see. It should say. Yeah, but I can't read that. I had like a 6th printing of issue 1, which at the time was still valuable. I think this is an original of issue 4, which I don't think, at least when I bought it, I don't think it was all that expensive. That's the first print of issue 4. I mean, those things went into so many rounds of reprints. The first issue, 3,000 copies. Yeah, I never owned the first issue, but I did own the original, like 2 through 12 or something. Oh wow, yeah. And had got rid of them at one point, and made some good money on them, but I wish I had them now. And then I went back and I bought like issue 3 and I think I have like issue 3 and issue 4. At some point I found them relatively. That first run, man, when they, the introduction of all of those characters. I mean, it's funny, for being a comic that so blatantly aped off of Frank Miller and Kirby to an extent, but really they didn't make any qualms of it. I mean, they were, no, absolutely not. But at the same time, to ape those comics so bad, so blatantly, but still the amount of world building that they did, and character designs, I mean, Shredder's a cool villain, and then Casey Jones, I don't know what I was looking at. It was like one of those boxes, like a geek box where you just order a subscription, they send you a box of shit. It's a box of crap every month. $29. But one of them was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle one, and the first item, if you signed up, you got a shredder, cheese shredder. It was just like a big metal cheese shredder with a shredder helmet on the top of it. I kind of need that in my life. Yeah, it was kind of funny. I was like, ooh, I almost need that. You almost got me, you sons of bitches. I almost need to put that in a yard sale in 10 years. I know. Teenage Mutant Ninja, let me see here. I'm trying to see like what the original issues. Okay, so this is a first printing. It's not that expensive. You can get them relatively cheap. I think after number 2, they go down in price pretty well. They're not terribly expensive. The first one. Oh, that's a second printing. Number 1 second printing, $165 on eBay. Yeah, see? Wow. Yeah. It's like even like the 4th printings were pulling in decent money at one point. Number 3, I think do I have number 3? I don't know. Yeah, I wonder what a number issue 1 first printing goes for. Let's see. If you can even find them. Yeah, I don't even know. I'm sure you can, but yeah, there's just not that many of them out there, which makes them rare.
Let's see what eBay has to say.
Yeah.
One first printing.
But funny stuff. I look back on that series, and I think for most of us, if you grew up in that era, for a lot of us, I think that was probably the first independent comic that I read. You want to look, non-Marvel, non-DC comic.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look at the timeline, but there was stuff I was reading, but it was.
I want to say I was probably
there.
in fifth grade, sixth grade. So it was all like X-Men and Captain America and that kind of stuff up into that point.
All right,
you were probably reading American Flag.
I was reading American Flag. I was also reading some other stuff.
10-year-old Sal reading American Flag.
Yeah, I don't know when that came out.
Listening to the Misfits.
Yeah. Okay, so here's number one, CGC 9.8, first printing, asking $79,000.
$79,000.
There's another one that's
a 9.8, and there was only 3,000 of them.
This one's a CGC 9.6 for $32,900.
Oh, that's a bargain.
Yeah.
It's a bargain.
There's some in the $7,000-$8,000 range that are. I mean, anything CGC, which you're probably not going to find one that isn't CGC. Yeah. But yeah, it looks anywhere from $8,000 to $80,000. Yeah. Here's one it's a 6.0. Oh, that's a second printing. Jesus Christ. Second printing. A 6.0 CGC for $800. Yeah. God, that's crazy. That's funny. That's funny.
That is funny.
I just found out I have a relatively rare and expensive Michael Jordan basketball card. Yeah, I've had it forever. So it's kind of a funny story, but my nephew, who's 10 years younger than me, back in the 90s, I would have been in my 20s. He was in his teens. He's a huge, obviously everybody at the time is a huge Michael Jordan fan, but he's a big basketball fan, and it was when basketball cards were super hot. Yep. And so him and my other nephew would always go to this card shop, and they would buy cards with whatever money they had, and they would open them up, and if they got anything worth anything, they would take them back and trade them
and buy more
cards. It was like they were more interested in opening packs of cards than like keeping anything. Well, he opens up.
It was the early version of unboxing videos.
Yeah, and so he opens up this pack and he finds this like holographic Scoring Kings Michael Jordan card, and I'm like, that's a really cool card. And like out of the pack, it was worth like $100, and I'm like, oh wow, yeah, and I'm like, I'll buy it from you. I don't want you to trade it in. And I think I gave him like $90 cash for it.
Which is more than he was going to get at the
for
sure
shop. For sure. So I took it like that day, bought it from him, put it in a plastic, like a hard plastic case, and I've had it forever since then. I don't even think about it. I have that. I have a few other baseball cards and a couple of other things like that, and I had it all in a safety deposit box for a long time, and forgot I even had the card. Honestly, I mean, I knew I had it, but I hadn't thought about it in forever. Well, my nephew, who is now 39 years old, is like reliving his childhood, and
you still have that card.
Fucking hits me up on Facebook and wants the card back.
Wants it back?
Yeah,
give me my $90.
Well, no, he wants to buy it from me, but I'm like, yeah, it's worth way more than $90.
How much is it worth now?
It depends on the condition. Now,
straight out of the pack into, I mean, it's got to be pretty darn good condition.
There's no dings in it. There's no corner bends. I mean, it's probably in a near mint, pretty high condition, and literally been sitting in a safety deposit box for 20 years. It's probably realistically right now worth somewhere $3,000 to $6,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say like $700-800.
I mean, you can get one for probably $800 to 800 to $1,000, but it's a non-graded and not in great condition. But the ones that are in like really good condition are, they can get up there in price. And I figure with the whole Jordan documentary thing, it's only going to go up in price. So I'm like, it'll
only go up in price again when he dies.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah,
I don't think I can give it back to you, dude. Sorry. I know.
Fuck no. I bought it fair.
Well, even it's not even the money though. It's not even like it's the idea that I've kept this thing for all this time. Like I had the foresight to keep it in a good condition, keep it safe for all this time, and it's like I want to give it to my kid. You know what I mean? Like I want, it's like it's not something. I'm a collector too. You know what I mean? So it's like for me to like, it's not the money sickness. So much, but it's just like it's Jordan. I'm a huge. I grew up in Chicago in the 80s and 90s. Like how am I? But, so
have you been watching the doc?
Oh God, yes.
It's good.
Oh,
I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, it's ridiculously good. It's so well done. I mean, ESPN does those sports documentaries so good.
I'll watch 30 for 30s, all day.
About stuff I don't even care about.
I watched the Christian Laettner one. Again, everyone hates Christian Laettner.
So
I
good.
love that one.
It's so good. I hated Christian Laettner. I was one of those. I hated him. And then you watch it, and it's like,
totally the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But
for
still,
sure.
You did.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But it's funny. The Jordan, The Last Dance is so good. Because what they do with it, essentially the premise of it is the last season, 1996. It's, Krause has said, this is Phil Jackson's last year. He's not coming back as the coach of the Bulls. Jordan has said, I'm not going to play for any other coach. Mm-hmm. Pippen is, pissed off and asked for a trade. And they're trying to win their second three-peat. Yeah, you know what I mean? So all this is going on.
You got Rodman, who's a fucking lunatic.
Rodman, you got the whole thing. Rodman's marrying himself and banging Madonna and all this craziness. But it
was a weird time, man.
But the interesting thing is that they use that as the premise, and that's what's happening now. But they go back in time. Every episode, they go back to, what was happening in 1983? What was happening in 1991? What was happening? You know what I mean? And
they go back to Phil Jackson with the Knicks.
They don't go back. They mention it, but they don't spend much time on that at all. Okay. They spend a lot of time on, it's mostly Jordan. I mean, it is probably 75 to 80% Jordan.
Yeah.
Which, it's...
Is it a puff piece on Jordan? Does it talk about any of the blemishes?
Oh, yeah. It talks about them all. I mean, no, there's no... I mean...
Because he was pretty much a degenerate gambler. And a womanizer.
It doesn't get into any womanizing at this point. They haven't talked about that at all. They deal with the gambling from a certain perspective of just this stories came out at the time. They don't necessarily like present it as this is what Jordan was doing. They present it as this story came out at this time about his gambling and that this is the effect it had. But like he says, it's like if I had a problem, my kids would be broke. I wouldn't be eating. I would be living.
He wasn't a degenerate gambler. He was an addictive gambler.
He liked to
gamble on everything. So
yeah, but it was competitive nature. But it wasn't like he was putting himself in jeopardy from gambling. He was. I mean, people would like he would gamble $50,000 on a round of golf, but that's like me and you gambling 100. He had the money.
$5.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like it wasn't money that he couldn't afford to lose. Yeah. So people had a hard time, maybe dealing with that fact. But the reality was, it wasn't like he he liked to gamble. He was super competitive. But they deal with that, like the stories of how much fucking fear he instilled in everyone, his teammates, the other teams. I mean, there's just story after story about, like, people knew, Michael he had gotten to a point where, like, after the first three-peat, even after the first 2 championships, he's the best player in the world. He's untouchable. He's the king. Everybody knows it. He's done everything you can possibly do in the sport. And it's an effort at this point for him to sort of get up and play 100%. So he would find ways to motivate himself, and it could be anything. The smallest slight that someone did, and everyone knew it. And it was, there's a pretty, I haven't seen him talk about this story, but there's a story you can find on YouTube about Sean Kemp, and I can't think of who his teammate was at the time, but Sean Kemp's a rookie, and his teammate is having a good game against Michael. And in the first half, he scores like 14 points on Michael. And Sean Kemp is fucking just egging him on. Yeah, go after him. He's got nothing. You're kicking his ass. And he's just like, and the guy, I wish I could remember who it was, but I can't remember who it was. Mm-hmm. He was more of a veteran, and he like goes. He was like,
dude, shut up.
Basically, he's like, dude, stop. And he literally goes to Michael. He's like, hey man, he's a rookie. He don't know the rules, Mike. In the second half, he scored like nothing, and Michael scored like 27 points on him. I mean, he just, but it was those kind of things he would use as motivation. There's but story after story of like, he's in the playoffs and they're playing against a team, and the night before the first game, he's out to dinner, and the head coach, who I'm not going to tell you who it is, or, cause but like does something that night in the restaurant, which is nothing. Like and Michael just fucking uses it and scores like 36 points the next 3 games, because he's just like, he had this psychotic mentality of like,
he's been slighted, and he used that as,
I'm going to use that as my way to get up. And everyone knew it. It was like, you didn't talk smack to him. You did not say shit. Like, there was another, like a rookie, or not a rookie, but some guy who was not a good player, and he just, for whatever reason, he has a fucking night against Michael. I mean, he puts up like 28 points. Yeah, something like 26 or something. Yeah. And Michael puts up like 4, has a bad night. And at the end of the game, he says something like, nice game, Mike. And they were playing him again the next night. And everybody's just like, oh, fuck, why did you say that? And Michael scored like 55. Yeah, and just shut him down. But it was it's just those things.
Or as Spike Lee would say, sunk the double nickel on him.
Yeah, he would use anything to motivate himself to get to a point where he was gonna beat you.
If you can find it. I'm a subscriber to the Athletic, which is a great. It's probably not worth it at the moment because there's no fucking sports. But they've actually been doing a lot of neat retrospective stuff. They did a whole story on Larry Bird, trash talker.
Oh,
and it's amazing.
Legend.
It's amazing that I had no idea that. I mean, Larry Bird for like a decade was the meanest, nastiest trash talker in all of basketball.
I have gone down some black holes on YouTube of like NBA stories from that era. From
there was nothing like it, man.
No, I loved
that
era.
I loved it. The 80s to mid 90s NBA.
Well, that's the thing you get from this documentary too, is like all of a sudden you remember. I mean, there's like I think it was the first or second episode, and there's a scene where like they're going in the playoffs. It's 1996, and the intro and the Gary Glitter, and I'm like, I'm getting amped up all over again. And I'm like, I know what happens in this game. I've seen it. Yeah, and it's just like, oh god, it was so awesome. Like, to live through that was just amazing. Like, to grow up here and that.
Well, I hear stories here in Milwaukee that it's when the Bulls would come to Milwaukee, it's obviously a sellout, but it would be people from Chicago, because it was the only way that a lot of people from Chicago could ever see Michael Jordan in person to drive to Milwaukee.
Yeah, the tickets were ridiculous. I mean,
you couldn't get a ticket to the old Chicago Stadium and then the United Center when they were playing. It was ridiculous.
But the documentary is phenomenal. I wait for it every Sunday night, and 2 hours goes by so fast. I could watch it. I could watch that every night for the rest of my life. Like, that's how good it is. It's so good.
Well, it's like watching that team. It's the only time in my life that I can remember turning on the TV, and if the Bulls were on, they were going to win. It's in a 82 game season, they'd lose in that stretch. They'd lose 15, 17 games a year.
That was
a year.
I mean, that was the thing too, like, especially, at his prime in the playoffs, it was just like, you knew he was going to find a way to win. You just had that confidence of, like, you knew he was going to find some way to pull through and win, and he just did it,
I feel like they were all like 4-0, wipeouts, but some of those series went pretty deep.
Yeah.
There were some tight ones, there were good teams. I mean, he's playing, Clyde Drexler,
there's a Clyde moment. The other beautiful thing is they're also interviewing all these guys now. So it goes from 96 to, it might go to 83, 87, 91, and then it goes to today. And like, one of the genius things they keep doing is they'll have somebody today like Isaiah Thomas talk about a game or what happened, or like,
oh wow, yeah, because they still don't like each other.
Well, so they'll have Isaiah answer or talk about something that happened, and then they'll go to Michael and they'll show him on an iPad what Isaiah said, and Michael's just like, okay, and then gives
funny.
his it's there's some beautiful moments.
That's funny.
Or like, they're talking to Steve Kerr now about, like, playing with Michael and the fight that they had and stuff like that, and just how, the interesting thing is like, everybody talks about how demonstrative he was as a teammate, how he demanded so much from all of them, and he tried to break guys because his philosophy was, if you can't handle me coming at you, you're going to be no good to us in the playoffs. And so he would go after guys and just, I mean, they were terrified of him, but they all were kind of like,
except Stacey King, who would just laugh.
Well, actually, the guy, it was Scott Burrell. He talks about Scott Burrell, and he's like, I tried to get Scott Burrell to fight me, and he's just such a nice guy. He would just roll with it. It didn't matter what I said to him. Scott Burrell just rolled with it. He didn't, it was. I mean,
Stacey King still has one of my favorite Michael Jordan quotes.
Oh yeah,
it was it the flu game where?
I don't know. Was it the flu game?
It may have been the flu game where Michael scores 69 points, and Stacey King comes off the bench, gets fouled, scores a free throw, and he's in the locker room afterwards talking to the reporters. He said, "Yeah, I'll never forget the night that Michael and I combined to score 70 points."
That was Stacey King. They talked to Spider a little bit. They talked to Rodman. They talked to Pippen, Kukoc, Phil Jackson.
Kukoc still one of the most underrated players out of that entire.
Oh, he was terrific.
Yeah.
That whole thing is interesting when the Olympics and how they fucking dominated him in the Olympics just because Krause was in love with him, and they were like, okay, fine, we're gonna show you how fucking. Because it was like they wouldn't pay Scottie Pippen.
Yeah.
And he's all he can do is talk about this fucking guy in Croatia for, because there was this long courtship that Krause had with Kukoc, and they're like, okay, we're going to go play this guy in the Olympics. We're going to show you. And they just dogged him, and it's like the first game. But then he came back and played pretty well in the second game.
Kukoc he's a good pro. God, fucking Jerry Krause, Jesus.
Oh.
All right, so there's some sports talk for you starved sports fans.
Right. I kind of forgot we were still recording a podcast.
Nice. Well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll
Sounds
save
good.
some comics talk. I'm not for sure exactly how long Jim Rugg is going to be on with us on Sunday.
4
We'll find out
hours.
as we go, but I got some other stuff to talk about. I talked about all my stuff, so I'm sure everyone's like, "What's Sal reading?" So we'll find out on Sunday, hopefully, what you've been up to, sir.
Yeah, reading some stuff, reading some comics, some old comics, some new comics.
Nice.
A little bit of both.
And then we still, honest to God, we're going to talk about Coffin Bound, probably next week sometime.
I got to read it. I still got to read it.
Hey, it's your pick.
I know, but I'm lazy. I know. I've been reading Shazam comics from the fucking golden age.
You don't have to do a one-on-one on the entire. You don't have to do a synopsis of every issue.
No. But I have a great resource. I have a terrific resource for the Comics 101. So I think most of my work is
called Wikipedia.
No, actually, it's not. It's not. It's a book that came out a few years ago that I picked up, and it's a great. I will mention it when I do it so that people can buy it if they want.
I know. I called you from work the other day, and I started telling this Neal Adams, Roy Thomas story, and you're like, dude, save it for the podcast. I was like, yeah, you're right.
Gotta save it for the good stuff.
Yep. All right. Yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed that. So I'll have to think of my next one. That's and if you like the Comics 101, let us know. And if you have any suggestions, love to hear them. Doesn't mean we'll do them. We'd love to hear them.
I do. I think I have an email. If you want to do an email real quick.
Yeah, let's do an email on the way out.
Let's see here. Oh, I never pulled this stuff up ahead of time. Give me a second. While I'm pulling this up, I just want to mention to people, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can obviously listen to the audio of this on Apple Music and Google Podcasts and wherever podcasts are found. If you're only listening to this and you'd like to watch us, if you'd like to see our beautiful smiling faces, you can watch the video of this on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so just go to YouTube and search for Around Comics, and you'll find it. I'm sure.
We do have faces for radio. Just warning you.
Yeah, we're not. Hey, man, everybody's doing it now. It's like everybody's got a shitty home-based, audio podcast. All right, let's see. What did I do with this email? I have no idea where it went. Oh, here it is.
SNL's been rolling.
This is from Christopher Vu.
Okay.
He says, the Batman trades I would choose for someone to read if they only had a layman's familiarity with Batman would be something like Paul Dini's Detective, because they are standalone stories. Great pick. They aren't steeped in a ton of Batman lore like Morrison's run or Snyder's run, where there's a ton of minutia that wouldn't make any sense to a person who doesn't even know that there have been upteen Robins at this point. Similarly to a comic like Jeff Johns' original run of Superman, I feel the best way to hook a new reader is to present to them quality material where the subject matter is what they are probably most familiar. In Batman's case, they probably recognize material from the old Batman TV show, Super Friends, or Batman 1989, where it's Batman, Robin, Alfred, a couple of goofy villains. Let them read that and go from there. So there you go. That's good. That's good thinking there, Christopher.
It is good thinking. Speaking of Batman the Animated Series,
I still have your DVDs of that. If you want.
Oh, do you? Do you really?
You gave me those a decade. Yeah, you gave them to me. I have them. I just happened. Oh, why would you do that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, you gave me them years ago. Of like, here, take these, watch them, and I'm like, okay,
watch these.
I don't think. Yeah, I still
change your life. Really saddened to hear about the passing of Marty Pascoe this past week.
Oh, I didn't know that happened.
Yeah, Marty Pascoe passed away. So
oh wow,
he was a writer on that series and comics and all sorts of stuff. So
I did not know.
Yeah,
rest in peace.
Another one of the good ones gone. So, yeah. All right. Well, we're going to be back on Sunday. We're going to have Jim Rugg with us. We're going to try and find Tom and rescue him from his children for a couple hours.
We gotta go tranquilize
if you have
his
any
children.
questions, send them in. Info at Around Comics. We'll have the live stream up on YouTube. You can find that through the Facebook posts and the Twitters and the TikToks and all that. In the meantime,
In between time,
we'll be everywhere in
and
around
comics. Yay! We're done.
Neal
with another-
Adams.
Neal,
Thomas.
little Neal Adams.
Greatest X-Men run of all
Wow. I'm gonna mute you now.
time. I know. Here comes the music.
Comics.
I put my Jim Rudd page up behind me. Just to say.
Comics.